On December 17, 1966, Delta Company received the order that would send them straight into one of the fiercest small unit fights of the Vietnam War. The men belonged to Company D, 1st Battalion, 12th Cavalry Regiment, part of the 1st Cavalry Division, the helicopter-borne force that ranged across South Vietnam. Their mission sounded routine enough. Move quickly toward Bang Son in Binh Dinh province and reinforce friendly units that had reported heavy North Vietnamese movement in the area. Intelligence mentioned a valley, coded 506, a quiet patch of jungle and farmland that looked harmless on a map. The 2nd and 3rd platoons loaded into Hueys with practiced efficiency. Veterans checked the new guy's gear, magazines clicked into rifles, and someone joked about being home by Christmas. Beneath the banter, everyone felt that familiar tension before landing, that cold hum of uncertainty no amount of training could erase. The landscape rolled past in strips of green and brown, the kind of beauty that always hits something. What the men didn't know was that the enemy had already turned 506 Valley into a trap. The NVA had spent weeks digging in, carving bunkers into the hillsides, masking them with living vegetation until they vanished into the terrain. They had mapped every likely landing zone, measured angles of fire, and prepared overlapping kill zones invisible from above. The plan was simple. Let the Americans land, let them feel safe, then open up when there was no cover left. At 3:40 p.m., the first helicopters flared over the valley floor. The LZ looked clear, a broad open field ringed by thick jungle. The men jumped, formed lines, and started forward through the heat that hit like a wall. Everything felt ordinary, almost calm. But just beyond that stillness, the NVA waited, eyes fixed through camouflaged firing slits. 15 minutes later, the silence shattered. Automatic fire ripped from unseen bunkers, bullets cutting through the open ground. Men fell where they stood, hit before they even realized they were in a firefight. There was nowhere to dive, nowhere to hide, only the flat killing zone stretching ahead. Within seconds, Delta Company understood. This wasn't a routine patrol. They had walked straight into a perfectly built ambush, and the valley had come alive. As smoke rose over the grass and men scrambled for cover, Delta Company's leaders faced an impossible question. How do you fight back when every inch of the ground is trying to kill you? The first burst tore through the formation before anyone could react. The jungle erupted in flashes of light and sound, machine guns, AKs, and grenades exploding from every direction. The 2nd and 3rd platoons were pinned flat in the open, trapped under a wall of fire that came from bunkers they hadn't even seen. It wasn't confusion or poor training that caught them. It was precision. The North Vietnamese had built their defense so well that the Americans had walked within feet of it without noticing. Sergeant Roge Perpetua Jr. didn't wait for orders. He saw men falling all around him, saw panic start to spread, and did the only thing that made sense to him. He ran straight to the nearest bunker. There was no cover, no chance to crawl. He just sprinted low across the field, rifle up, shouting for others to follow. The NVA gunners swung their barrels toward him and cut loose. When medics reached him later, they found 11 bullet holes in his helmet alone. His charge hadn't broken the enemy line, but had shown everyone watching what courage looked like when there was nothing left to lose. Nearby, Lieutenant Chester Cox, Delta's commanding officer, was trying to coordinate a defense through the chaos. Bullets sliced through the air as he shouted orders, trying to get radio contact with the other platoons. Platoon Sergeant Donald Lamies stayed beside him, relaying commands and helping keep the scattered men in communication. Both were hit within moments, falling side by side. In less than 30 minutes, Delta Company had lost its company commander, a platoon sergeant, and several squad leaders. The chain of command was broken. Now, the fight wasn't organized anymore. It was survival, small groups scattered across the field, firing back when they could, dragging the wounded wherever a patch of dirt offered minimal protection. The air filled with cries for medics, the sharp crack of M16s, and the deeper thump of NVA machine guns hidden in the trailing. PF Jack Dion was among the first killed. The letter he'd carried from home, eerily wishing him safe passage, whether in life or death, found in his pocket later. Medics like Specialist Michael Anderson crawled through the fire to reach men like Dion and Timothy Ewing, performing mouth-to-mouth in the open while rounds snapped overhead. A bullet tore through Anderson's hand, but he refused to stop. The field was chaos, but the medics kept moving. Every man still standing could see what was happening. They were being torn apart, and nobody was coming to save him. But in that moment of collapse, something else started to form. A stubborn will to fight back no matter what. With their leaders dead and the jungle burning, Delta Company's survival now depended on a handful of men who refused to give up, especially the unlikeliest hero among them, the radio operator. When command vanished, the medics took charge of courage. Private First Class Alton Kennedy knew what that meant. Not orders, not strategy. Just pure instinct to save whoever he could. He crawled through the open killing field again and again, each trip longer and riskier than the last. Bullets snapped the grass around him. Dirt exploded at his elbows. Each time, he reached another wounded man and dragged him back. By his fourth run, everyone watching understood what he was doing. That fourth run was his last. He was hit while pulling another soldier to safety, collapsing in the same open ground where he had saved others. Kennedy never came back, but his determination pulled others forward. Nearby, Specialist Michael Anderson, his hand already shattered by a bullet, kept going. He moved from man to man, ignoring the blood seeping through his own bandage. Every time he found someone still breathing, he stopped the bleeding, whispered to keep them calm, and moved on. No one had to tell him to keep working. That's just what medics did. They ran toward the fire while everyone else tried to survive it. Then there was Richard Rowe Rock, the quiet radio operator, who wasn't even airborne qualified. His nickname, NAP2, was short for non-airborne personnel, a running joke among paratroopers. But in the chaos of 506 Valley, Rock's nickname stopped being a joke. When the ambush erupted, he didn't hide behind his radio. He picked up an M79 grenade launcher and started firing. Each thump of the launcher landed a round into the hidden bunkers that were cutting the platoon apart. He moved between positions, launching grenades with uncanny accuracy, silencing at least 2 machine gun nests. Then Rock dropped the launcher and became a one-man rescue team. He crawled out again and again to pull the wounded back, patching them up with whatever bandages he could find. He even reached his sergeant, the same man who had teased him earlier about running if things went bad. Rock didn't run. He dragged his wounded sergeant back through a storm of gunfire. Soldiers who saw him later said he moved like he didn't believe he could die. Calm, steady, almost defiant. In a single afternoon, the man nobody took seriously became the anchor holding the platoon together. But even with Rock's defiance and the medic's heroism, the battle wasn't ending. It was only growing worse. The valley that had seemed silent hours ago was now a ring of fire. As daylight faded and helicopters roared overhead, Delta Company thought relief was coming. But what happened next would push them deeper into hell. Helicopter gunships swept in over 506 Valley, but the air support quickly turned into another nightmare. As the Hueys dove low, the North Vietnamese gunners opened fire with devastating precision. 2 helicopters were blown out of the sky, crashing in flames into the tree-line. 7 more were so badly damaged they could barely limp away. The valley had become a trap not just for the soldiers on the ground, but for anyone trying to save them. Commanders tried calling in rockets from aerial artillery to smash the bunkers, but the chaos below made it impossible to mark safe targets. A few rockets landed too close, wounding the very men they were meant to protect. The order went out to cease fire. From that moment on, Delta Company was alone. In the middle of it all, Lieutenant Paul Prindle, bleeding from a glancing head wound, staggered to his feet. A bullet had circled inside his helmet without piercing it, knocking him unconscious for several minutes. When he came to, he grabbed a machine gun, shouted, "Let's go," and opened fire on the bunkers. Every burst from his weapon bought seconds for wounded men to crawl back to safety. Soldiers later said Prindle fought like a man who had already died once and wasn't afraid anymore. As the sun sank behind the ridgeline, the battlefield fell into an eerie quiet. Smoke hung low, and the cries of the wounded echoed across the valley. Men who could still move crawled toward the tree line, dragging the injured with them. Others lay where they fell, too weak or too exposed to move. Then came the darkness, and with it, a new kind of terror. Private First Class Michael Noon was one of those left stranded in the open. 3 bullet wounds had torn through him, one so deep that his abdomen was exposed. He lay motionless through the night, trying not to make a sound as red and black ants crawled over him, biting into open flesh. He picked them off with his one good arm, hour after hour, refusing to cry out. At one point, an NBA soldier walked up, grabbed him by the shoulder, and let go, not because he pitted him, but because the ants bit him too. Back at Delta's position, First Sergeant Gene Helgerson couldn't stand waiting any longer. He gathered a small team, including Battalion Surgeon Captain Edward Wagner, and crawled into the darkness. Inch by inch, they searched for survivors, listening for faint voices. They found Noon barely alive and carried him out by hand, through the mud and vines, all the way to the perimeter. When dawn broke, helicopters finally landed to take the wounded away. Of the 62 men who entered 506 Valley, only 35 could still fight. 18 were dead. 12 were critically wounded. The rest were silent, not from fear, but from exhaustion that went beyond the body. There were no photographers, no headlines. The battle didn't have a name the world remembered. But those who survived carried it for the rest of their lives. The smell of burning grass, the cries in the dark, the medics who ran into fire, and the radio operator who became a legend without ever asking to be one. History forgets the small battles. But in 506 Valley, courage wasn't measured in medals or victory. It was measured in how many men refused to leave each other behind.